everyone. Welcome to this conference hosted by MS Focus, the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation. I'm your host, Kimani Hendricks, and I'm the Multimedia Communications Coordinator for the foundation. And today I'm joined by Nichole Goble, who will be talking about communicating between care partners and people living with MS. So we will address all questions and comments after the presentation. Nichole Goble is currently the Director of Community Initiatives at Caregiver Action Network. She's been with the organization since 2017, and as part of her role, she manages activities programs with non-funding community partners and moderates caregiver roundtables and learning collaboratives. She also presents to various community groups on topics related to caregiving and the resources and supports provided by CAN. Nichole brings a unique perspective to the role, being an individual with disability who has been on both sides of the caregiving relationship. She has a background in disability advocacy and experience working with youth and families. Nichole, thank you so much for joining us. We're happy that you're here today to present this topic. We're excited to hear what you have to share with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. So let me get the slideshow here up and going. All right. So yes, what I want to talk about a little bit today is navigating those tough conversations and communicating with your loved one. And this is something that a lot of family caregivers can struggle with. And we're going to talk a little bit about those struggle points and some tips to navigate those. All right. So yes, my name is Nichole. I'm the Director of Community Initiatives here at Caregiver Action Network. And I'm a long distance caregiver. I care for my mom who has late stage COPD as well as lung cancer. I was a former caregiver for my grandfather who had bone cancer. And yes, I'm an individual with a disability. So one of the amazing things about all of my colleagues here at CAN, in addition to myself, is that we all kind of bring our own unique caregiving experiences to our role. And I think it really, makes us mindful of the kind of resources and content that we put out there, because we want to make sure these are things that speak to caregivers in lots of different caregiving kind of scenarios and situations. So I want to go over just really briefly what I'm going to be hitting on today. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of those hardships or challenges in communicating with your loved one. What are some of those snags that we can encounter? What are some tips for navigating those challenges? And I think a really important one is, sometimes in conversations, feelings do get hurt. Things are not interpreted the way that we intend, or we don't take something the way that someone intends. And so how do we continue? How do we keep the conversations moving, or just kind of move on in those situations? Because as a caregiver, that's a really important thing. You don't want something that's going to completely kind of put a halt to things moving forward and continuing those conversations, talking to your loved one. And then I'm going to close things out by talking through some really, I think, important resources that we have here at Caregiver Action Network. Okay, so first things first, communication is key. And this is why I'm really excited to talk about this. Communication is something that's really important for all caregivers, regardless of what a day-to-day may look like. So whether you are someone that is really hands-on with care, doing lots of things to support your loved one every day, or maybe you're someone like me that's a long-distance caregiver, and I talk to my mom every day, I do my check-ins, all of those things, but I'm still at a little bit of a distance. That communication is really, really important in making sure that we're staying kind of on track with with what we need to do as caregivers and making sure that our loved ones' care needs are being met. So let's talk through some of these communication hardships. Tough topics. Now, when we think about caregiving, when we think about any kind of relationship dynamic, there are going to be times where we have to have these tough conversations, things that are uncomfortable to talk about, for a variety of different reasons. We can be fearful of maybe hurting our loved one's feelings, um, or maybe it having an impact on our relationship when you have to bring up something that's maybe a little bit tough. Maybe you feel ill prepared, or not that well informed when bringing up something. Feeling a little bit off guard, or I know we need to talk about this, but I don't know if I know all of the bits and pieces that we need to cover. And you just feel a little kind of out on a limb, so to speak. So that's what we talk about when we're referencing those tough topics. And there's a lot of other nuances here too, but it really does boil down to, hey, they can bring up some really challenging emotions that can lead us to feeling a little bit on edge, perhaps can lead to some hurt feelings, and we're afraid of how that will impact our loved one, vice versa. Or again, going back to that feeling ill prepared. Another hardship here, disease connected difficulties. So conditions can obviously impact the ways that our loved ones are able to communicate. We see this a lot with any kind of like neurological, cognitive condition as well, where a person's ability is speech may have there may be an impact there. Also, muscle weakness or just being able to project and speak from that perspective as well. So there's a number of different challenges that can come with specific diseases and conditions related to communication. And so this can play out a couple of different ways. One, it means that you need to now figure out a new way to communicate with your loved one. So if having a conversation where just speaking back and forth isn't useful, what are some other things that you may need to explore? What are some other um, techniques? What are some other methods, assistive devices, all of those things? And that can be really difficult to parse out. And then also it can, for your loved one, it can be just really exhausting and tiring and frustrating. We've all, I think, experienced a situation in our lives where we're trying to communicate something and it just doesn't feel like we're getting through to someone, or that what we're saying is really coming across. And for an individual that has perhaps some difficulties with speech and communication, that can be especially, I think, profound. So these are some of the hardships that when you need to factor in impacts related to your loved one's condition, how those can play out. And hardship number 3, long distance caregiving. Obviously, this is something that speaks to my caregiving situation. Being able to have that, in-person, frequent kind of conversations are one thing, but when you have to do it over phone, over video chat, that can be hard. It can be hard to keep those kinds of conversations regular. Schedules happen, things happen. And so that can be really, really hard, especially if you're balancing work and all of these other things on top of caregiving, making sure that you're carving out that time to have communication with your loved one is really, really key. So yes, and also having some consistency with that as well, making sure that you kind of know what you want to talk about if there are things that are really pressing. And this can also go beyond your loved one. If you're having family meetings, maybe there's other family or friends that are helping with care. Um, Making sure that you're having consistent, ongoing kind of communications with them as well. And then what I like to call the filling in the gaps. If I'm there in person with my mom and I'm having a conversation, there are certain things that I'm able to pick up, body language, or I'm in the space with her. Maybe there are things that I'm able to see that will tell me something that maybe she isn't saying. And so it can be a little more challenging to fill in gaps. Think about it this way. How many times have we gone with a loved one to a doctor's appointment? The doctor asks, how are you feeling? And their response is fine. Where we know, having been with them, that maybe not fine. Maybe there are some things that we want to bring up. There have been some difficulties. And so when you're at a distance, that can be a little bit more challenging to kind of fill in those gaps. Okay, so we've talked through some of those challenges, and certainly at any point in time, these are just kind of the high level type challenges and things. If you guys want to share specific challenges in the chat, and have some conversation going there, that's really, really wonderful. Always feel free to utilize that chat, pop in questions as well. But let's talk through tips for navigating some of these communication challenges. Be a caregiver and. So one of the things that can be something that's really important, especially when we talk about conversations with those tough topics. A lot of caregivers will share that they kind of lose themselves in their role as a caregiver. And sometimes it's important to take a step back and realize that you're not having this conversation just as your loved one's caregiver, but you're still your loved one's spouse. You're still your loved one's child, your whatever that relationship is. It's important to keep that in mind and keep that at the forefront too. I think that really helps with making sure that the way that we're communicating with our loved one, the tone that we use, all of that comes across the way that we intend, because it's not just getting into that caregiver mode, it's really tapping into that relationship that we have with our loved one. Don't neglect your feelings and needs. In conversations, especially when things do perhaps get a little bit tough, and we're talking about some challenging things, can be really easy for some, and I'm one of these people too. I don't like conflict. And so anything I can do to kind of, okay, this is fine, let's move on. It's important to voice your needs and feelings as well. You think of yourself and your loved one as a partnership, because that's what you are. As a caregiver, you're there as a support partner for your loved one. You're a care partner. And so it's important that your feelings and your needs are being reflected too. So write down how you're feeling. And this can take shape a lot of different ways. Maybe if you know that you have to talk about something that's really challenging, before you had that conversation, you're writing down some of your feelings so that you know how to talk about them with your loved one. It's important to first identify those feelings too, and that can be really tricky. And so one of the ways that some folks have said has been beneficial for them is, maybe there's, when knowing that you have to talk about, trying to put an example in place, but when I was caring for my grandfather with bone cancer, one of the things that we had to have a conversation about was a change in kind of the care plan. He had been doing chemo and radiation. It wasn't really working, wasn't having the effect that we wanted. And so, my grandpa said, I want to talk about not doing the chemo and radiation anymore. And I knew that was going to be a really, really, really hard conversation for me to have. And so I wanted to make sure that I was entering it, being able to know kind of how I was feeling, and I could communicate that to him in case there were any hiccups, but so that I could also focus in on what he was saying as well. And so when I would be thinking about it leading up to when we would sit down and have that talk, I would feel really fearful. And so tracking that emotion and saying, it makes me feel really fearful. Um, having this conversation because I don't know what our next steps can be. I don't know what that will look like and how we talk about this with the doctors. So it's important to identify those emotions. And like I said, one of those ways is to maybe track it for a day, or track it over a period of time to see like what maybe some of those triggers may be so that you can use that to better navigate a conversation where some of that may pop up. And then know the difference between your needs and your loved one's needs. This can be really difficult. Again, going back to this idea of caregivers that lose themselves in the role of caregiver. Knowing the difference between, what your loved one needs and what you need, and being able to put voice to both of those so that, both of those are shared and you can find a way that works for everyone, especially when you're in those conversations where you're trying to come up with a solution to an issue and, understanding both perspectives, I think is really important. And of course, a tip for that is always to use those I statements so that your loved one knows that you're talking about how you feel. And it's very clear. And everyone feels like they're being heard. So focusing on openness and honesty, I think this kind of goes without saying. If you are going to be having some challenging conversations, I think this is really important. But this is just kind of a general thing. As a caregiver, you want to be operating with all of the knowledge, all of the apt and correct knowledge possible. You want to be able to know that when you're asking your loved one questions about how they're feeling, if they've taken their medications, all of those things, that you're getting a response that is truthful. And so setting that foundation that for all of your conversations, they're open and they're honest. And then, I know that we talked about where there may be some challenges with communications that are more, maybe on a physical end, but maybe there are some communication differences. Everyone has slightly different ways that they may like to communicate. And so, trying to identify if there may need to be a different approach. If you're finding that you're having conversations, but you're not necessarily always on the same page, maybe it's just a difference of communication styles, and maybe there's a way to kind of bridge that gap, so that what you're trying to say is being communicated and what your loved one is saying is kind of landing with you as well. So, and part of that, I think, is asking your loved one how they'd like to talk about things. Um, we we don't often do that, I think, in any kind of setting, right? We don't think to ask, oh, is this a useful way for me to share this with you? Because maybe people like it in writing. It's the idea behind, do you want me to follow up with an email, a phone call? Think of it that way. That way everyone again is on that same page and everyone is heard. Making those check-ins a regular thing goes back to what we said about consistency. Writing down what you want to say beforehand. This is again those emotions, but also just those logistical things. Any kind of meeting prep, right? Come in with notes that kind of think of it that way. I think that also making those check-ins regular can help with those feelings of vulnerability or that you're exposed. And what that means is that if we can anticipate that we're having a conversation, if we can have a little bit of foresight and planning or a little bit knowledge beforehand, we feel a little bit more prepared. We feel a little bit more secure. And so having those conversations be regular can assist with some of those feelings as well. Given as space as needed. This is a big one. Sometimes you just need a break, especially if you're talking about something that's really difficult, or it's just a conversation that you know doesn't really seem to be going in the direction that's coming to a solution. Taking a break, giving some space. And then again, yeah, if you're finding yourself at a spot where you've tried some different things, but it's still not working, going back and trying a different communication method. Um, those are ways to kind of keep things flowing so that you can really focus in on everyone feeling comfortable and in a situation where they can be open and honest in conversation. Establishing limits. So know when you need a break. So we talked a little bit about, if a conversation just doesn't seem to be going in an effective direction, maybe it's time just for a break. And so part of that means recognizing what some of those signs can be. So racing thoughts, quickened breath or a pulse, those things where maybe we're feeling nervous, tense, agitated. That can be a sign that, okay, we need to take a break. So ask for that break. And the way that you can look at it, and of course, this is just a suggestion, um, it can be a break or it can be a hard stop. And so if it's a hard stop, it's like, okay, the conversation just needs to stop here for right now. Maybe it's something that we can come back to at a different point in time. Or a yellow light can be, okay, I just need a break. Let's take maybe an hour break, or we can come back to this later. Have a conversation tonight about this. But it's important to kind of establish like taking a break. Here's how long this break is going to be. And that's really what that red light and yellow light can indicate. And then getting some space, taking a walk with a friend, clearing your head, that can be really helpful, especially if you're going to come back to this conversation. Having a little bit of distance and clearing your head can be really helpful and kind of refresh you for going back into that conversation and can just kind of reframe things too. So utilize that break time in that way. So, like I mentioned at the top, remember that you are a team. Again, it's important that these conversations are ongoing, and that they really do focus in on what your loved one's goals and wishes are. Your loved one's condition may change. There may be changes in lots of different things, and to be able to have that ongoing conversation helps you both address what some of those changes are and how to navigate them. So having having those ongoing conversations, but always making sure that you're, you know, framing your loved one's wishes and goals at the top. And then also making sure that you're utilizing this time um, to create and update documents. This is something that, the paperwork piece of these kind of conversations. So, okay, well, we've decided that we're doing X. What do we need to do? What do we need to change in terms of anything that we have established now? So, advanced directives, 5 wishes documents, anything of kind of those legal documents that you may have as part of like a patient file. Those are really important to always keep updated too as your loved one is addressing any changes in their goals or wishes. Now, going back to my example with my grandfather, we, we had conversations about the change in what that care plan would be. And then we had to make changes to the medical file so that we knew that that would be communicated effectively to his doctor and we would be kind of proceeding on that path. So that's always a piece to keep in mind too. So in addition to checking in with yourself during these conversations, it's important to check in with your loved one and notice when your loved one may be at a certain struggle point. Notice if your loved one has kind of turned sad or withdrawn, um, or is agitated. Um, this is clearly a sign that, again, they may not want to talk. They may need a break. But going back to what we talked about at the beginning, as well, they may be thinking about or fearful about saying something that can hurt your feelings. I know in conversations that I've had with both my mom and my grandfather, there were times where when we would be having conversations that were really tough, they would say, well, we didn't want to say this because we didn't want to upset you. And it's totally understandable. And so being able to kind of clue in on and understand that that may be occurring is important. And then underscoring that with letting your loved one know that you're here for them, that you're there as their care partner, as their support. And even when things are tough, you're there as their support, and that you want to make sure that you guys are a team and on the same page. So I want to quickly talk through how to navigate when feelings get hurt. It happens sometimes. Emotions can run high in certain conversations. We may say things that maybe don't come across as we intend, or maybe our loved one has said something that maybe came across in a way that they didn't intend. So when your feelings may be hurt by something that your loved one said in conversation, here are some ways to kind of move through this so that you can keep on track. Number one is to let them know. It does no good to let some of these feelings just kind of be pushed aside and fester. Um, because try as we might, it's going to be really difficult for us not to bring this into the next conversation. And so these can lead to some pent up feelings of resentment. But it's hard because our loved one can't really do anything if they don't know that we've been hurt. Communicate that with them. Let them know, you know, uh, what you said really hurt my feelings. Just so that they understand. Again, your feelings are important in these conversations. Keeping answers general to keep from from further discussion, but I think from taking the discussion down a path that isn't going to be useful. So there are times where, especially intense conversations, emotions can kind of take a conversation off in a slightly different path than, kind of what we intended. And so keeping, the conversation and the topics pretty straightforward can help with that and keep everyone kind of focused. And especially in those challenging topic areas, having that topic and moving through it with some brevity, with some clarity, can make it a little bit easier to do for everyone. So I think another little piece here, and this kind of goes with letting them know. Try not to necessarily take it personally. Like I said, we sometimes say things that when we are at a heightened emotional state, we may not necessarily mean. Or we say things in a way that don't come off the way that maybe we intended. And so keeping that in mind with our loved one, maybe they said it one way but meant it something else. So when we're communicating, hey, you hurt my feelings, understanding that, hey, they more than likely didn't mean to hurt our feelings. It was just something that they said, didn't think about how we may take that or how it would come across. So keep that in mind. And you can always continue that conversation later if your feelings are hurt and maybe you're at a place where I need a break. It's okay to come back to that conversation and say, I think we can come back. I need a break. Again, outlining how long that break will be, when you will come back, agreeing on that, and kind of setting that up. So I know that's a lot. And certainly I haven't had a chance to really peek in on the chat yet. But if you guys have tips on, I've had these difficult conversations and here was something that was really helpful when, they said something that hurt my feelings, or here's how they communicated to me that I had said something that had hurt their feelings. Do share in the chat. I feel like we learn so much from each other in these kind of sessions. So, and kind of wrapping things up, I want to highlight some resources. The Family Caregiver Toolbox. So at caregiveraction.org, we have what we call the Family Caregiver Toolbox. And this is really just kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of our resources. You can see that they're broken down into a number of different categories. So we know that caregivers will often come looking for something and have different kind of things that they're thinking through. Um, again, we have them broken down based on, well, I'm a new caregiver, a longtime caregiver, um, I'm working in caregiving. So it really just kind of speaks to lots of different kind of components to a caregiving situation. So I really like the way that it's organized, but you also have caring by condition. We're continually building out our disease and condition specific resources. Sessions like this are really helpful because we're able to get also some feedback from folks to let us know, maybe where there's some additional resources that we may be able to put together. So that is our toolbox. Very great resource. And I also want to highlight the caregiver help desk. So sometimes you have a question, an issue, a concern, and you want that one-on-one support. And this is where the caregiver help desk comes in. It's exactly what it sounds like, kind of. It's kind of like a customer support for caregivers. It's not a 24/7 support line. Its hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. I always get slightly mixed up on my time zones. And what's great is that you have the phone number here on the screen, and you'll be directed or connected with someone that's going to be able to listen and kind of point you in the right direction of some resources, not just resources that we have at caregiveraction.org, but other resources, maybe resources from organizations in your community. A lot of people call looking for, services or supports that are local to where they are, or if they're a long distance caregiver, where their loved one is. So maybe you're looking for a local chapter of an organization to connect to get some more information about your loved one's condition, those types of things. They will be able to provide you that information as well. So you can call, but if you go to caregiveraction.org, you'll also see that they're in the, let's see, it's the bottom little corner, right hand corner of the screen. You're gonna see a little help desk gadget or widget that pops up. And so you can click it and you can chat with someone from the help desk. So because some people don't like to talk on the phone, and we want to make sure that the help desk is accessible. So, and also it is, they are able to chat if you are someone who needs support in a different language. We've had caregivers that reach out and say, I'm able to speak English, but my parent is Spanish speaking or French speaking, and we need a resource in this. They're really good about making sure that they're able to get you those resources as well. Okay, so to close things up, I am going to post in the chat a link just to a very, very, very brief kind of poster rate, nothing mandatory, but just gives us feedback on, again, content that we can continue to build on, both in terms of resources, but also presentations like this, so that if we're able to present to the group again, we're able to get some feedback on resources, information that you guys would be interested in learning about and being connected with. So I'll put that in the chat, and I'll put up here our information to be connected with us. If you have any questions, and you want to connect with us, obviously our website, there's the help desk number again, info@caregiveraction.org. It is an info email address, but I promise you, I check that account. So it's not just one of those infos that can go into a void. If you reach out to it, you'll probably hear from me directly. And then our social media as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. The information, it seems, is timely for me. I don't have caregiver experience. However, I think that I've been stressing the importance of communication in just about every relationship that I find myself in, just family, friends, or elsewhere. Communication is definitely key because it brings clarity, and I don't think that um, it can be overstated, how important it is because you have to learn how to communicate with your folks. It's the only way you're going to be able to articulate your needs and have them understand you and vice versa. And we definitely need more dialogue like this. So thank you so much. Um, I don't see anything in the chat right now, but for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, or if you're watching from Facebook, if you're on Facebook, you can drop your question or comment into the section below the live stream. And if you are with us on Zoom, you can type your question into the chat box or the Q&A. You can also use the raise hand feature if you want to speak directly to Nicole. It looks like something just came into the chat and that's Fabia. Um, Fabia, do you see anything on Facebook at the moment?
Yeah,
And
there's one
Nicole,
question. But Nicole, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Sure.
let me see if I can. Oh, I see the comment, Fabia. So someone from Facebook asks, is depersonalization common with multiple sclerosis?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. He wants to know if depersonalization, is it common with MS?
Based on my understanding, not necessarily. I think the way that, and certainly I'm not an expert, so I will defer to people with that knowledge. But when we think about the way that MS more typically can impact communication, we are looking at some cognition or memory um, components that may come into play. And then also the way that it can impact, for example, the diaphragm, and make speaking more of a challenge. Those are some of the, I think, prime examples that come to my mind in terms of how it would impact kind of communication and how you would engage with your loved one. But, there's really no way to, one of the things with any condition is that it's not going to look the same in two different people. And so there can be other either coexisting conditions or other issues that may pop up that may be more rare.
Yeah, I'm honestly not entirely sure what they mean by depersonalization. So can you explain that to me?
Yeah, I don't know if the person wants to maybe explain a little bit more in detail, but I just took it as depersonalization as some difficulty having like that direct connection with the person. So yeah, if that that's a really great question though.
Because there are a few different places my mind was going with that, and I was like, I wonder what they mean. So, Sarvana, if you wanted to clarify, you can just comment in the live stream below again. But I do hope that Nichole did answer your question. I hope that she had a little better bit of a handle on that than I did. I don't see anything in the comments as of yet. But I am curious, you did mention earlier that you um, have been on both sides of the caregiver relationship. So what has that been like for you, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it can be, looking at it from the kind of care recipient, for lack of a better framework there, perspective, being someone with a disability. I think that it can feel really, you want to make sure that you are being heard in conversations because it's your care, it's your health. And, I'm coming at it also as someone who was born with a rare disease. And so having it been something that I was born with, that's always been kind of part of my dynamic and my relationship with my mom. Like I say, I'm her long distance caregiver, but she will be the first to tell you that she is also my long distance caregiver. And when I have to travel for work, she texts me when it's time to take my medication because she knows that regardless of what I do to make sure that I remember, I am prone to forget. And so she will send me texts to be like, 30 minutes, take your medication. So um I think she was also very thoughtful about making sure that self-advocacy was something that um were skill sets that I built up. So wanting me to find a way to communicate not only my needs, my wishes, and just things that I wanted to share with her, but also with doctors, knowing that there would be a point in time where she wasn't going to be taking me to the doctor anymore. I'd be taking myself. And so giving me the tools so that she felt secure that I got it, that I'm able to talk to the doctors and share. From the caregiver perspective, it's been interesting because now I just feel like we've kind of flipped that, I'm reminding my mom about her medications too. I talk with her before and after all of her doctor's appointments to see like how she's feeling, if she has her questions that she wants to ask, have an understanding of like what the appointment's going to cover, if it's just kind of a general check-in or if it's, there's something going on that's being addressed in the appointment. And then also dealing with like a lot of the logistics. How is she getting there? My mom lives in rural Iowa, and so she's now not able to drive. And so making sure that she has a ride to her appointments because it's quite some distance. and navigating that with some family that help out there. So, but I also have to take a step back sometimes because one area that conversations can become really hard is when, what your loved one wants, what they're communicating, isn't what kind of you think is maybe best. I use the example of my grandfather for that just because it was such a difficult and painful thing for him to be like, I don't want to continue this specific treatment plan anymore. It's not working. And this is what I want to do. To where I was like, no, let's keep, like, maybe it will work. We can do it a little bit longer. But I had to take a step back and be like, no, I'm here to kind of put his needs and was kind of at the forefront of these conversations. So I need to listen, I need to understand where he's coming from, and I need to support that when we go and talk to the doctor about this. And so it's really hard. And finding ways, taking those breaks, finding yourself a support network of friends, of other caregivers that you can talk to in those times. I really wish I would have known other caregivers when I was kind of in the throes of that to say, wow, today was really, really horrible. Like we had this conversation about this change and, I feel really rough about it. Having someone that may understand, have been there, would have been, I think, a really, really amazing help in that situation. So don't negate that. Always build up your support network as well. When we talk about taking a walk with a friend, it can also just be a call. It can be like whatever you need it to be. Build up your support network so that you have folks that you can also chat with and have as a sounding board.
There are a lot of factors that really keep the machine running the way it needs to be. And because I think we're all imperfect and we all have our own lives and struggles, sometimes it's hard to step out of that and to really say, okay, maybe this is not what I would do, but they are insistent upon, you know, taking action and going a completely different direction. And so I need to support that, even if I don't agree with it, even after they have explained it to me. If I still don't agree with it,
Yep.
hush, and be there for them. Yeah.
Exactly. And really, really, turn to that support network for you. And have that in place. It's what I have really loved about being able to, connect with virtual groups like this because they're so impactful and important because it's now a much easier way for folks to be connected to those individuals, make those friendships and those relationships that can serve as that support. So yeah, it's hard. And I saw, I think there was another question that came through in the chat.
It was actually, I see two. So the first one was a comment from the person who asked about depersonalization. They were just explaining. So they said that the person they care for describes seeing themselves in the third person. So feeling
Oh,
like their thoughts and feelings and body or parts of their body, seeing it from the outside, kind of being above yourself, or I think what spiritual people would call experiencing a rising, just
mm,
that out of body experience. It's interesting. Damaris I don't know if this is a question or comment, but it's quite long, so bear with me. It says, when navigating a difficult conversation, my mother would rather stay silent and ignore than talk things through. She has MS, and I've tried to explain the importance of communication. She says that I should respect her space when she asks for it, um, or that I should just know that she needs space when she becomes silent. So is it okay to leave a conversation on hold for 24 hours, or how much time and how much space is appropriate, or how much is too much? That's a good question.
That's a phenomenal question. And I love the way that you kind of framed this question as well, in terms of wanting to make sure that you're being respectful and mindful of, you know, giving her space. Yeah, I think it's 100% okay to leave that um, conversation on hold for a period of time for 24 hours. Again, some things, there's going to be kind of that ticking clock element to it, right? You need to make a decision. Something you need to have the talk. It can't be pushed off. Um, but yeah, if you're certainly, lots of things can probably wait a 24-hour period. Take that time. And within that, um, maybe as kind of a, okay, we'll come back to this in 24 hours, ask, you know, is there a way that's helpful to you to have this conversation? Is there something else that we can be doing? Do we want to, do you want to write a note, um, and share kind of your thoughts and feelings that way? Some people are much better just with writing down what they want to say, how they feel, and letting that kind of be the jumping off point so that they feel like everything that they need to say is there. So I think as part of putting that off, going back to what we talked about in the presentation, which is, is there another method? Is there another approach to this that could be helpful in keeping this moving forward? Especially if you notice that this is something that happens consistently. It could just be like, this is just a really difficult way for your mom to have the conversations. And so, hey, I noticed that it can be really tough for us to talk, and it's important that we were able to communicate about these things. Is it useful to do it this way? Can we try it this way? Maybe come up with a couple of options to see if that helps. But yeah, in terms of, how long to put it on hold, that's really going to depend on, what the topic is, the timeliness that any kind of decision needs to be made. But certainly 24 hours is I think a pretty good go. It gives you time to recalibrate, refresh, quote unquote, sleep on it a little bit, and kind of approach the conversation, from maybe a different angle.
Yeah, I personally can relate to what this individual is saying. I can speak for myself, but I am the type of person where if I see there's a problem, I kind of like to just jump on it and fix it right away, or have the tough talks, so that we are not holding on to it and just only making it worse for ourselves by doing that. And not everybody is that way. And I think that can be a little frustrating because you just want to get it done, talk about it, okay, let's move on. But there are times when that space is necessary, because if you are reacting to things in the moment, then you're kind of just you can fly off the handle because you're emotional, and by being so emotional you can make mistakes, that you might regret later, or you say something in a way that you probably shouldn't have said, and it would have come off a completely different way if you had taken the time to just relax, so that same time that that person needs to get their thoughts and their feelings together, I think it's vital to take that time and do the same for yourself too.
Exactly. And also think about this in terms of how you're, I don't want to say like planning conversations, but going back to having consistent, regular, ongoing conversations with your loved one, check-ins. Um, Figuring out if there's ways to, as part of like how you're approaching these topics, do you break it up so that sometimes just I'm kind of the same way in that if there's something that's really challenging and tough, I just want to like, let's just get through it, let's figure it out, and let's move on to the next thing. But that can be really overwhelming for folks. And so being able to also say, well, maybe we need to break this up. Maybe we figure out like, all right, here's the conversation that we want to have now and that we feel like we can kind of manage. And then we're going to get to the second piece, and that can wait a couple of days, and we'll come back and visit this one. But let's start here so that it's not overwhelming, because that can also be kind of fear inducing and kind of panic inducing too, is like, wow, we're gonna have like this really big talk, and I don't know where things can go, and I'm really worried about it. To where if things are a little bit more bite size, that can be helpful for some folks, and they're going to be a little bit more open to talk, feel more prepared, and more comfortable. So those are just a couple of maybe different approaches.
I think that one thing that I will bring up is it's hard when you feel that you've exhausted so many options and things are just still not going as you hope or
Yeah.
as the other person hopes, but somehow you're lost in translation, no pun intended, but there's just a place where you guys share a vision of the end, but not quite sure how to get there. And, it's challenging because then you have to really go inward and say, okay, is this even worth talking about anymore? Like what am I willing to let go of? And then, yeah, I hear a lot when people talk about advocacy, especially within this community. I hear people say, oh, it's okay to fire your doctor. It's okay to get another caregiver if you can. If you feel like your care is not, I don't want to say not important to them, but if they're just not on your frequency and it's just not gelling and you've tried multiple times and different ways and approaches, you might want to find somebody else. But that's not easy all the time, especially because people that you are caregiving for, they are so close to you or you've known them all your life and vice versa. So relationships are hard,
Yeah,
and you throw illness into it, and I think that makes it even harder. So it's like, when is enough enough almost? Or do you ever reach that point and you only feel like, oh, I'm gonna lose it, but then you never really lose it, so
yeah.
it's
And
weird.
always take a break when you feel like you've gotten, like when you are even getting close to that lose it, because that's just not going to be useful at that point. And that's okay. It is hard. And it's not something, it's very easy, I think, to beat ourselves up over, right? Like, I got a little too emotional with this. I needed to take a step back. But that happens. These are, you know, we're not just a caregiver. we have relationships with with our loved ones. We care about them. We're here to support them, and it's okay uh, to to have those emotions. It's about being able to kind of manage and say, all right, here's where we are. We either need to pause here or again, keep the conversation going so that it's kind of highlighting where both of you are coming from. As a caregiver, your role in making sure that your loved one is getting the care that they need is obviously so important. And so your perspective, your thoughts, your feelings, how all of that can come together in the role that you play in them, so important. And so be able to put voice to that, while also understanding that, you know, you're, you're also thinking about what your loved one wants, what their wishes are. So it can be really difficult. It's not an easy role to play. So that's why, we say, don't forget that you're also a spouse, you're also child, you're also parent or whatever relationship you have, because that can help kind of recalibrate things and be like, okay, things are tense. This is my mom. Let me take a step back and, all right, mom, I get it. Both upset right now. Let's get some coffee and we'll revisit. Um, and that can be a good framing. And it also reminds you of that piece of not to take it personally. When someone says something that is jarring or upsetting to you, um, in these kinds of situations, it may not have been an intentional thing at all. Emotions are heightened. We all can be kind of on edge, and that's okay too. And so understanding that, oh, I didn't mean to say it this way, or okay, I'm really upset. Maybe they didn't mean to say it that way. It really helps keeping that relationship in mind to kind of keep that also um in place so that we're not thinking, you know, our loved one is just trying to make us upset. Because that's not the case.
Yeah, they're trying the best they know how, and so are we. And I think that giving one another grace is of the utmost importance.
Yeah.
Patience, respect, love, it shouldn't get lost in that emotion. Because it's easier said than done to not get carried away in that sometimes. But yeah, definitely trying not to take things personally. So important, especially if you're empathic like me. But I do not see anything else on Facebook or the chat, but I guess that we're at the hour or just a little bit over. But I do thank you for staying and just our dialogue and for the questions from Damaris and I forget the other person's name, I'm sorry, on Facebook. But if you missed any part of this conference, you guys, you can head over to the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation Facebook page because once we close out the webinar here on Zoom, it will be available to watch from the beginning on Facebook. This webinar will also be up on our YouTube channel within a few days. So if you're not already, please subscribe to the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation on YouTube and click the bell so that you can get notified when we do upload. We put several videos up every week. Our next conference will be this Monday, actually, the 29th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time with Dr. Herb Karpatkin, who will be doing his town hall style conference Ask the Physical Therapist. It's always a good turnout for that. And if you guys have time, if you're on Zoom watching with us, can you please give us your feedback after the webinar is over. We would love to hear from you as far as what you thought of this webinar, and if you have suggestions as to what you would like to see in our webinars in the future, we appreciate that as well. Thank you again, Nichole, for this insight. It was great to meet you, and we hope that everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.